I titled today's Neville Goddard conversation, Subtle Variations of the Same Ecstasy. Now, this conversation is built upon our conversation we had on Sunday, in which we spoke of the feeling of ecstasy or ecstatic. Now, one of my reflections and conversations that I've been having as a result of that video was, should I imagine anything that implies the feeling of ecstatic or something specific? And so it's the same thing, whether I'm consciously aware and can see in my imagination what exactly implies the feeling of ecstatic, or as feeling is the secret, all that represents what is ecstatic reveals itself in the five sensory experience, in business, in relationship, in health, in all areas of our life. If the world of imagination is infinite, and we can experience anything in imagination via the five sensory experience, then I want to imagine that which implies ecstasy by actually allowing myself to be stimulated into what implies. So as I mentioned, I believe that whatever I imagine that implies the feeling of ecstasy, whether I consciously come up with it in my imagination, or even if I just maintain that feeling, the feeling is what implies. So bringing ourselves into that feeling of ecstasy actually recreates or replicates itself in the five sensory experience, refracts out as the different experiences of life that represent ecstasy. And we were talking about this in Thursday's video. Sat Chit Ananda. Truth, consciousness, bliss. Now, I like the word nuance. One of the things that I discovered about myself as a result of working with this information is nuance variation. So I found myself doing things like enjoying performing arts, really savoring food while I eat, and each experience that I do each day being even more present, because I find that the five sensory experience, the presence in the five sensory experience, actually stimulates in my imagination more creative ideas, or that which I can relate over to the feeling of ecstatic, nuances, new experiences. Now, what we want is to go beyond the five sensory experience, to discover what we truly want to represent. Because if we look around to see what others are doing, or what is already in the five sensory experience, and we're inspired by that, perhaps in the earlier stages of the journey, that could be very helpful. Perhaps it's a certain business goal, relationship goal, or life experiences that we see others enjoying, and we want to also do the same thing. Then after we have those experiences, we become more nuanced. We say, what else is there? The world of imagination is infinite. There are infinity experiences that have not been realized in the five sensory experience, and we can go into our imagination and find these experiences. Or we could do certain things that inspire. For example, I found myself, as a result of working with this information here, enjoying performing arts to a higher degree. I enjoy cooking. I got into gardening. And all these different experiences that I never thought I would get into, including I rekindled my relationship with dance. I used to break dance back in the days. And when we were growing up, we would want to go to the clubs. We would look forward to it so we could dance. And so now I found myself reconnected back when I was watching some TikTok videos, certain dance moves. And I said, I got to do that. I want to learn how to do that. And I actually stayed up till like 2 o'clock in the morning working on different dance moves. And it's what it implied. Yes, I wanted to do it as well. But I also found that through trying new things, it stimulated my imagination for different ideas. Ideas that I infused in this week's videos. Ideas that I infused in my business. ideas for different experiences that may not seemingly be related to the dance. It was stimulated because of the nuances of dance. So, nuance is a slight variation of meaning or feeling, we could say. There are infinity degrees in relation to ecstatic, infinite experiences in relation to bliss and ecstatic, in representations of what we would call different areas of our life. So in the context of music, slight variation of tone, how we express via the musical instrument, which produces music which others enjoy, and they say, I never heard that before. That's a new beat. Because the individual, whether they consciously do it, and I always like to encourage in these videos the ability to consciously do it by working with our imagination, make the imaginal world as vivid as the five sensory experience. What we find is that it blends. Inner and outer blend as one. They're actually one. And thus we can precognize and imagine that which we will actually see. Neville states, the principle of least action governs everything in physics, from the path of a planet to the path of a pulse of light. Least action is the minimum of energy multiplied by the minimum of time. Therefore, in moving from your present state to the state desired, you must use the minimum of energy and take the shortest possible time. Your journey from one state of consciousness to another is a psychological one. So to make the journey, you must employ the psychological equivalent of least action, and the psychological equivalent is mere assumption. Body expresses upon the suggestion. So I suggested to myself, I'm going to be able to do this move. Maybe it took me an hour or two to get it down, but you know what? I had a lot of fun. Upon acceptance of the end, the journey was flow-based to learning that particular move. And I said, now I want to stack it with other moves. I started to get back into the feeling that I had while we were doing these things back in the days, which through that feeling was bringing forth all different kinds of experiences. When we left the clubs, we would go get some food and we would have some of the deepest conversations, life-transforming conversations. And I believe it's because we were allowing the suggestions to go in, because the overthinking and the over-analytical thought processes were no longer there, because we made flow a priority via the dance. And so body is an expression of mind. Resistance ceases upon surrendering to the vision realized. As we discussed in a few weeks ago, Neville Goddard conversation, in which we related the information over to performing arts, dance, athletes, and so forth. Since body is an authentic expression of what we assume ourselves to be a certain way, and it expresses. We want to capture the feeling that implies ecstatic. So I felt like doing it. I didn't question it. I just said, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to go do it. When I look back at my life, there were so many things that I really wanted to do, but for whatever the reason may be, and we recognize by working with this information, it was my own thinking patterns, I was not allowing myself to do it. By simply allowing myself to do what I really wanted to do, I would further stimulate other ideas, inspirations. As mentioned, we would have these deep conversations that would shape our lives after these experiences by encouraging doing what we truly want to do. I mentioned this, I do spontaneous trips. If I feel like leaving this weekend, I will go. I won't question it. I won't ask why. I go. And so when I end up going, I end up having all these experiences. Inspiration, ideas, creativity, new ways of working with imagination. I'm surrendering to the assumption that implies ecstatic. Some refer to this as following their bliss. Now, let's go over that question that Neville was asked. The question is it possible to imagine several things at the same time, or should I confine my imagining to one desire? In which Neville responded, Personally, I like to confine my imaginal act to a single thought, but that does not mean I will stop there. During the course of the day, I will imagine many things, but instead of imagining lots of small things, I would suggest that you imagine something so big it includes all the little things. Instead of imagining wealth, health, and friends, imagine being ecstatic. It's a feeling. One does not need to see it in imagination. They allow themselves to go into the feeling, what implies ecstatic. And you'll feel it. And we can enter that feeling by saying, I am that feeling now. And so he says, you could not be ecstatic and be in pain. You could not be ecstatic and be threatened with a disposition notice. You could not be ecstatic if you were not enjoying a full measure of friendship and love. What would the feeling be like were you ecstatic without knowing what had happened to produce your ecstasy? There's the key. What would the feeling be like were you ecstatic without knowing what had happened to produce your ecstasy? There are moments where I just feel it. And then it implies something. I want to go do something, so I go do it. And if for some reason there's resistance in relation to, then these are experiences that we're having throughout the day that we could revise at the end of the day, which will go through the revision process. Because at the end of the day, I could actually have imagined myself doing what I really love to do. And that changes everything. Because I find then on the next day, I'll actually do the thing. And I'm able to maintain that feeling of ecstatic. And I'm actually able to imagine ecstatic without, as he says here, knowing what had happened to produce your ecstasy. This makes even more sense to me today because I've been making flow a priority. So when we make flow a priority, or ecstasy, or whatever implies as the priority, we actually can stimulate in our imagination things we have never experienced before, which we'll automatically commit to because we fall in love with those experiences in our imagination. And it expresses in what we do, how we relate to others, how others relate to us, how we relate to environments, how environments relate to us. And what we'll notice is we'll go into moments of such ecstasy and bliss. And I can assure you this will expand for longer durations, as has been my experience, in which I'm not even thinking or imagining anything specifically that implies the feeling of ecstatic. I feel it. I'm there in it. And then I notice during the day, I automatically do things, or I automatically have certain experiences. Upon reflection at the end of the day, I say, that's ecstatic. And so to stimulate this, he says, reduce the idea of ecstasy to the single sensation. Isn't it wonderful? Now, when we say something like that, isn't it wonderful? It totally relaxes the overthinking, over-analysis, doubt-based, overly reasoning about this and that, and it goes straight into the subconscious. Just like that, we accept it as a reality, and we feel it. Feeling is the secret. And to emphasize this, he says, do not allow the conscious reasoning mind to ask why. So we could say, we're not trying to not allow the conscious reasoning mind to ask why. Rather, it's accepted because it's who we really are. We're accepting ourselves. Because as he says, perhaps if a person does that, they'll start looking at this visible causes, this and that. There's an infinite world of imagination that we have not explored yet. It's infinite. And it's ready to be expressed in our creative expressions, entrepreneurial endeavors, what we desire to see in our experiences. And no need to be confused about it because we commit to what we love. So if we go back to what I mentioned in the beginning, should I imagine something that implies the feeling of ecstatic or something specific? I recognize that all things that I imagine, whether I consciously do it or I simply step into that feeling of ecstatic without imagining anything visually or an experience that is symbolic of it, will express itself as some experiences that are symbolic of it. And so he says, suspend judgment as to what is wonderful. I love this part. Suspend judgment as to what is wonderful. Catch the one sensation of the wonder of it all, and things will happen to bear witness of the truth of this sensation. This is what we're talking about here, nuances. There are so many different experiences. A person might say, I want to create this business success. They get to that destination. They earn that kind of money. I want to have this car. I want to have this house. I want to have this relationship. They get to the destination. And then they say, what's next? And usually those things are stimulated by looking around to see what others have done. And nothing wrong with that. I certainly started this journey in that path. And then we get to the point where we say, what about experiencing things that others have never experienced, that I've never seen in this five sensory experience? Is that possible? Well, I can assure you that's possible. Because I've had so many experiences of what I truly desire, which then later on, I talk to people, they're like, oh, that's an obvious experience. And I say, look, there was a time in my life where I never saw that. Now I'm surrounded by people having these experiences all the time that are symbolic of that. And to me, those are symbolic of first-class representations. So when we think about that for a moment, first class to the destination, as we learned from Abdullah, what does that imply? We don't even have to think about what it implies. We can simply encourage the idea that there's far more to this existence that we have experienced in the five sensory experience. And we can experience those things via our imagination by the feeling of ecstatic, which will reveal itself as the experience, and as I mentioned earlier, also what visually represents it in the mind's eye. As he says, precognition permeates all the scriptures of the world. Now, according to Rudolf Steiner, in the earlier periods, people were capable of direct spiritual perceptions or clairvoyance, but not yet of rational thought. And then he proposed that humanity now has the task of synthesizing the rational and the contemplative spiritual components of cognition, whereby spiritual perception would be awakened through intensifying thinking. And so some of the ways that I had experienced this is, for example, in my business dealings, we came up with creative solutions to solve challenges that were never read in a book, that I never heard from anywhere else. And they came up during the conversations. I started to notice this in relationships as well, personal and business relationships. I started to set relationship criteria. And I wanted to have experiences that is based on how I truly want it to be. I wanted to look beyond what was considered traditional, or this is how the relationship should be. And I wanted to find what would truly imply the feeling of ecstatic. And then I started to experience people who would show up and they would want the exact same things that I wanted. The exact experiences, the exact style of relationships, which back in the days, and this is in personal and business, would be things that would be considered, people would say, that's not how it works. And while that might be true in that reality, I recognize that there are infinite realities. There are infinite states, as Neville Goddard speaks. And we want to discover what we truly love, how we truly want to live. And I believe this feeling of ecstatic helps us get there. So we're going to tie this into some of the insights from Rudolf Steiner, as well as the revision process. Because what I believe is that when we revise our experiences that we had during the day that we could say are not aligned with that feeling of ecstatic, what we actually notice is we make peace with whatever thinking patterns, beliefs, interpretations, etc. And we actually start to experience even more of how we truly want to be. And then we understand that there's far more in imagination that has been experienced. Certainly, we can be inspired by others. As mentioned, in the earlier stages of the journey, we usually are. However, there's a certain point where you could say, get bored with those experiences. Seems like, what else is there? Everything just seems boring. I've done all these things. Well, there are infinite things to experience. Infinite. And so if a person then wants to, they can discover it by capturing the feeling, as he says, Reduce the idea of ecstasy to the single sensation, isn't it wonderful? Do not allow the conscious, reasoning mind to ask why. So rather than looking around to see what others have done or what you've done in the past or whatever, five sensory experience, what's written in a book, or how it should be, go with the feeling that implies how you're going to experience it to be, which is how you truly want it to be. And when you experience it, you'll know that it was generated from within by your commitment to that feeling. Isn't it wonderful? And so to help with this, Rudolf Steiner gives these 6 exercises. So again, the reason why we're doing this is to actually look beyond the 5 sensory experience and to tap into a deeper connection of all that implies, which are infinite states in imagination, and have experiences in life. We could say that others have never experienced, or maybe they have, or more accurately put, find deeper nuances of experience of how you really want to live. And so one of the exercise is self-control over one's thinking. He says, contemplate any object and concentrate one's thoughts exclusively on this object. For example, I like to do it with plants. So all you do is just concentrate your thoughts exclusively on the object. And you're just contemplating it. And what you're doing is you're allowing from within certain connections, certain ideas to surface about the plant. And you'll notice that after a period of time, you'll start to see it from different perspectives. You'll start to understand it more so. You'll start to see things that you never saw before. You may start to form connections with other areas of your life. You might find symbolic representations or aspects revealed upon contemplation of the plant. Number 2, exercise willpower by choosing a regular time of day of the week to practice something like watering your plants or a morning routine. Neville had mentioned this. We want to develop strength of attention, and as we've been discussing here, reveal the richness of our imagination, which is infinite. And this ties into the exercise number 1, because then what it allows us to do is actually maintain that focus. None of these exercises on concentration are done from a place of force, rather from a lighthearted contemplation. Number 3, he says, practice equanimity. He says, foster calm emotional responses. So observe when we're about to react, and we get better at it with practice. Meditation helps, including meditation as part of your practice. And observe prior to overreactivity, and let go of that state, and bring yourself back into a center. You can apply what we discussed on Thursday's video, and you'll find that to be very helpful. Number 4, try to see positive aspects in everything and to make the best out of every situation. So one of my favorite exercises is to have a conversation with someone and to find different attributes or different characteristics or different elements as to their life experience and what they share, and get really excited about it. Be really interested. And this is referred to as positive aspects, what genuinely interests you, and you'll find parallels and connections. This is going to stimulate our imagination because we're looking beyond how we related to things, perhaps from how we had learned on how it, quote, should be. Number 5, practice being open to new experiences and ideas. Now, as mentioned, when you commit to the feeling of ecstatic, and one does not need to visually see it, whatever implies the feeling, bring ourselves into the feeling. You'll notice that when you maintain flow, it's easier to bring yourself on command, you could say, into that feeling, in the moment. That's because you have more of a fluid mind, fluidity of mind. No over-analysis or anything like that. We simply say that's the way it is, and we feel it in the moment. And it could be a slight feeling, and we can continue to meditate or contemplate on that feeling, and it will expand, and we'll actually see symbolic representations of it, of what we desire, visual scenes in our imagination from that premise. And so when he says be open to new experiences and ideas, he says never let expectations based upon the past close your mind to the lessons of the moment. We are again practicing feeling beyond the five sensory experience and into imagination to see things from a different perspective. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to just encourage having new experiences. And you'll notice that when you encourage the feeling of ecstatic, as I've been doing, and I continue to encourage, you get these ideas like, I want to dance, I want to paint, I want to get into gardening, I want to travel, I want to experience this, I want to experience that. Allow yourself to be open to those experiences. And so the way I describe it is, what I notice is that's how the five senses build a relationship with the sixth sense. And so I have a deeper integration or relationship with the inner and outer, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Number 6, he says, find a harmonious, balanced relationship between the above 5 qualities, practicing each regularly and becoming able to move dynamically between them. So I like that because I relate that over to dance, I relate it over to theater, performing arts, and that's why I love performing arts, because I get to experience others moving dynamically as a theatrical performance, and that inspires me to do the same. What it's stimulating within me is my own ability to do that. And by continuously doing these exercises or variations of these exercises that imply, it's easier to reconnect us back to the feeling and to imagine what implies, recognizing, as I've realized this from my experiences, that what implies actually shows up in imagination, or it might not. However, feeling is the secret. And from that feeling, I experience the symbolic representations of it in people, environment, information, and so forth, playing out the theater that is what is within, that is symbolic to that feeling of ecstasy. Now, if a person didn't have a day that they would say is symbolic to that feeling of ecstasy, what it implies, we can actually work with the revision process. So in combination with these exercises here, and what I've shared in this video, which has been my experiences, and actually as a result of, we can further encourage the feeling of ecstatic, and as a result, experience more of that in known and unknown ways that will reveal itself automatically so. And thus we'll get into more nuances in mind. They'll start to unravel new potentialities, new possibilities, new ways of doing things, new life experiences, because the world of imagination really is infinite. And I believe we're just getting started when it comes to exploring imagination. We're just beginning. And so he says, now this is how we do it. At the end of the day, I reviewed the day. I don't judge it, I simply review it. I look over the entire day, all the episodes, all the events, all the conversations, all the meetings, and then I see it clearly in my mind's eye. I rewrite it. I rewrite it and make it conform to the ideal day I wish I had experienced. So we take the experiences that we had that we would say are not symbolic to what represents ecstatic. And as a result of working with these other exercises and living from this premise, we'll be able to stimulate in our imagination different visual representations that imply the feeling of ecstatic in relation to those experiences. For example, a person might have been walking down the street during the day and they saw people looking at them a certain way. Maybe they felt unaccepted as a result of the interpretations as to how others were looking at them. And I would say that for me, that does not imply ecstatic. So what implies ecstatic for me is that people are noticing me and they're coming up to me and saying, wow, your energy is so great. What is it that you do? You must do something that you really love to do. And we're engaging in conversations with the different things that I do. And then they say, wow, I'm going to do the same thing. And this is something that I actually did. And what I noticed is I had those exact conversations where I noticed that people seemed to automatically smile at me. It looked like they had a straight face while they were walking. And then they look at me and then just smile. And so when I talk to people, they say the exact same things that was in my imagination, which again implies how we truly are, which is bliss, which is ecstatic. And sometimes I know these things, and sometimes I don't know these things. And so if I know these things of how it would imply the feeling of ecstatic, I include it as my visual representation during my revision. So he says, I take scene after scene, I rewrite it, revise it, and having revised my day, then in my imagination, I relive that day, the revised day, and I do it over and over in my imagination until the seeming imagined state begins to take onto me the tones of reality. So that is what we are saying I am too. And as we said in Thursday's video, Sat Chit Ananda. He says, it seems that it's real, that I actually did experience it, and I have found from experience that these revised days, if really lived, will change my tomorrows. When I meet people tomorrow that today disappointed me, which is our own interpretation, we could say, in relation to people, they will not, because the interpretations are, more accurately put, we see it for how it truly is from the perspective of love. He says, they will not, for in me I have changed the very nature of that being. And by changing the very nature of the being, what I realize, it's actually revealing how we truly are, how we truly see ourselves to be, which is a representation of love, ecstatic, bliss. That's how we truly are. And maybe we've been identifying with certain thinking patterns, which has been playing out as the theater, as he said, when I meet people tomorrow that today disappointed me. That was the theater. And he goes on to say, they will not tomorrow, for in me I have changed the very nature of that being. Or we could say, I have revealed the very nature of that being. And having changed him, he bears witness tomorrow of the change that took place within me. It is my duty to take this garden. And this is one of my favorite parts, the poetry. He says, it is my duty to take this garden and really make it a garden by daily using the pruning shears of revision. And I'll tell you, after getting more involved with gardening, this makes even more sense. And sometimes I think that just by working with revision, the pruning shears of revision, it actually somehow stimulated the desire to garden. But then I also reflect that past, present, and future are existent in the now, and that revision changes it all. Something to think about. So I trust you found this video to be helpful, and also these exercises that Rudolf Steiner shared. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage the feeling of ecstatic. You could say, I recognize the feeling of ecstatic now. In this moment, I feel ecstatic. From this premise, I actually experience, on the day-to-day journey, what had implied ecstatic in my imagination. Upon reflection, I see that I was the cause of it through the identification of the feeling of ecstatic. I also find that it's easier for me to imagine what implies the feeling of ecstatic, as I appreciate the infinite nature of imagination and all the nuances of the infinite states, as I understand now to a higher degree the meaning of infinity. I recognize that I can have exactly what I want, and I realize that happens automatically by assuming the feeling of ecstatic right now. Isn't it wonderful? If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.